I don't remember the last time anyone called me by name. The vox crackles every few breaths, but no voice answers back. I was shot 7 minutes ago, maybe 8, and I can feel the mud tightening around me like a grave that doesn't want to wait. They said the collars would buy us redemption, that dying for the Emperor would wash the sin clean, but I think it only makes it quieter. My collar says 3,119. The vox says nothing. The Emperor says less. The rain has thinned to a mist, heavy enough to sting the eyes but too soft to wash away the blood. I press a hand against the wound beneath my ribs. The glove slips on the mix of mud and what's left of me. The med pack is long spent. The servitor corpsman vaporized with the first salvo. I can still hear them, sometimes their metal limbs clattering, their prayers muttered through static, but that's memory, not sound. The line went silent, hours ago, maybe days. Out here, time has stopped counting. I was a soldier once, a guardsman of the Cadian 212th, before the collapse. We had names then letters, not numbers. I carried mine like a weapon, carved it into the butt of my lasgun, whispered it before every charge so the Emperor might remember me whole. Then came the mistake. A hesitation, a single heartbeat of mercy when I should have fired. They called it heresy of compassion. The commissar called it cowardice. The tribunal didn't waste parchment on explanations. By dusk, I was sentenced. The transport that took us to this world smelled of oil, prayer, incense, and fear. Shackles sang against the deck as we learned to march in rhythm with guilt. They branded our forearms, fitted the collars black steel rings engraved with the Imperial Aquila, blinking with red promise. We were told the code. One misstep, one unspoken thought, and the Emperor himself would judge us with a spark. Some of the men wept, some laughed. I stayed silent, because silence felt like practice for what waited ahead. When we landed, the sky was already on fire. The siege had chewed the world to dust long before we arrived. Every trench was a grave filled halfway, every breath a prayer and an apology. The officers didn't speak to us, only to the collars. Commands came through the vox in binary bursts. March, dig, die. We obeyed. That was the beginning of our redemption. Now I lie where I fell, and the mud drinks what's left of my blood. I wonder if the code still listens, if some machine on a distant ship still tracks the rhythm of my heart to decide when to detonate. The thought almost comforts me. It would mean someone remembers. If the Emperor is watching, I hope he sees the small things, the way we held the line, the way we died quiet. I hope he understands that faith can live even in the condemned. They tell us the Emperor sees all things, but the Penal legions are stationed where even his light feels tired. We were ghosts before we died, assigned to wars that didn't matter, worlds already abandoned. They call it penance, but it feels more like recycling. The administratum keeps count of the collars, not the souls inside them. When they fitted mine, I remember the hiss of the lock engaging the click that sealed my sentence into metal. The tech priest who installed it wouldn't look me in the eye. He anointed the device with sacred oils and murmured a prayer in binaric cant, like he was blessing a weapon. Maybe he was. I could feel the pulse of it against my throat, a heartbeat that wasn't mine, whispering the same word over and over, obey. They gave us rations, worn lasguns, and a single promise that if we served until death, our records would be burned clean. No one believed it, but belief isn't required in the Imperium, only obedience. The commissar recited the same speech before every deployment. Sin is not washed by water, it is burned away by fire. We didn't answer. The collars did that for us, flashing once in acknowledgement. That red blink became the only light that meant anything. The first mission was a slaughter. They called it assault by faith. We were ordered to cross an open field under orbital fire to draw enemy batteries away from the loyal regiments. We didn't have armor, or cover, or hope. When the signal came through the vox, advance, we ran. The ground burned beneath us, and the sky turned white with the fury of saints. Men screamed prayers until their collars detonated, turning the words into thunderclaps. The enemy couldn't even tell us apart from the explosions. That was the point. I remember one man, collar 3,290. He'd been a murderer before the sentence, but he carried a charm carved from a child's tooth, said it reminded him of forgiveness. During the charge, he stumbled beside me, missing an arm, laughing through the smoke. "Maybe he'll see us now," he said. Then a round took his head clean off. The charm fell into the mud. I picked it up and kept running. I don't know why. When the barrage ended, there were fewer of us. The commissar called it a miracle, I suppose. In the Imperium, surviving your own redemption counts as divine favor. We were loaded back onto transports, silent and shaking. The officers never spoke to us, but the collars chirped again, new codes, new missions. That night, I dreamed of the field. Not the battle, just the silence afterward, the fog, the bodies, the faint red lights still blinking from the collars of the dead. I thought I could hear them whispering through the vox static, a chorus of unfinished prayers. I woke to the same sound I hear now, the wind dragging across the shell holes, carrying the scent of iron and oil. It's strange how quickly the body forgets fear when death becomes routine. The only thing I miss is hearing someone say my name. The medallion from 3,290 rests against my chest, beneath the collar. I think he'd find that funny, that a coward like me carries his relic. Maybe that's how redemption works. We borrow fragments from the better dead and hope it adds up to forgiveness. They said we were the Emperor's instruments of redemption. But no one tells you what redemption looks like when the instrument breaks. Every wound becomes a sermon, every scar a verse. We were told to die loudly, so the loyal regiments might remember what faith costs. Yet out here, I have learned that the loudest deaths are forgotten first. When I close my eyes, I still see the field endless, grey, burning with the color of rust. The commissar's voice still echoes in my skull, a relic more durable than bone. "You are already dead," he used to say before every charge. "All that remains is how long it takes the Emperor to notice." Some men prayed at those words, others laughed. I used to listen in silence, tracing the edge of my collar and wondering if mercy was a malfunction waiting to happen. The truth is, I wasn't brave, I was tired. Tired enough to stop running, tired enough to stand where they pointed. When the next bombardment came, I remember thinking how beautiful it was, the sky opening in red petals of fire, the air tasting of ash and copper. It was like standing beneath a blooming cathedral built for no one. There was a moment, maybe seconds or hours later, when I realized I was still alive. My squad was gone, names I can't recall, only numbers scattered in the mud. The medallion from 3,290 still hung around my neck, blackened by smoke. I dug myself from the trench, half blind, and staggered toward the sound of the vox. The signal was faint, whispering fragments of orders, but I followed anyway. You learn quickly in the penal legions. Direction means purpose, even if it leads straight to the grave. I found a comms outpost, a ruin really. The vox unit was shattered, wires spilling like entrails. I remember kneeling there, pressing my ear to the static, hoping to hear anyone. The noise was warm, almost kind. It sounded like breathing. For a heartbeat, I believed it was the Emperor, listening. That's when the shot came. It wasn't dramatic, just a single impact to the ribs, clean, precise, a professional's mercy. I dropped before I even heard the report. Whoever fired didn't finish the job. Maybe they thought the collar would, maybe they couldn't be bothered. Either way, I've been bleeding ever since. Now I lie here with the vox humming beside me, and the static feels like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. I talk to it because silence feels like disobedience. Maybe this recording will reach someone, an officer, a clerk, a priest who still thinks redemption is real. Or maybe it will sink into the mud with me. One more whisper in a world that forgot how to listen. If anyone ever finds this, tell them we fought. Tell them the condemned still prayed, even when no one answered. Tell them the collars blinked in the dark like 1,000 dying stars. And if you find the medallion, keep it. 3,290 said it brought him luck, and for a while, it did. I used to think judgment would sound like thunder, holy, deafening, final. But when my sentence was given, it came in a whisper through a cracked vox grill. No ceremony, no scripture, no audience. Just a single order stamped with the Imperial aquila. transfer to penal service redemption through labor. That was how the Imperium forgave you, not with mercy, but with purpose. The tribunal was held in the ruin of a hab block, walls still bleeding soot from the last bombardment. I stood before 3 officers and a scribe whose servo skull clicked with every breath. They didn't remove my manacles. They didn't ask for confession. The commissar read the charges in a tone that made guilt sound redundant. Cowardice in the face of the enemy. Failure to advance under order. Unauthorized use of compassion. Each word hung in the air like smoke, heavy and irreversible. I wanted to tell them it wasn't fear. I had frozen because the soldier in my sights was just a boy barely more than 16, his lasgun shaking, his eyes wide with the same terror I carried. For a second, I saw myself in him. That was all it took. I lowered my weapon. Someone else didn't. When the blast tore him apart, I felt the sin enter me like shrapnel. It never left. They called that hesitation heresy. They said the Emperor demands action, not empathy. I wonder if he truly does, or if that was the commissar speaking through borrowed faith. The sentence was immediate. I was stripped of insignia, number branded into flesh, armor reclaimed for someone more deserving. They shaved our heads, burned away our oaths, and lined us up for transport. Around me were deserters, murderers, thieves, heretics, all equal now under the same crime, existence without worth. The shuttle that carried us to the holding barge was silent except for the sound of chains. No hymns, no prayers, even the engines seemed ashamed. When the hatch opened, the air hit like rusted metal and unwashed sin. Rows of servitors worked the loading docks, bolting collars onto necks like livestock brands. The tech priests moved among us, their augmetics glinting in the light, muttering rites in binaric cant that sounded too much like laughter. When my turn came, they pushed me onto the slab. The collar was cold, almost tender as it locked into place. I felt its weight settle around my throat, a second pulse ticking out of rhythm with my own. A voice inside it whispered the command code, not words, but a vibration beneath the skin. I remember thinking it sounded almost alive. They didn't call us soldiers after that. We became assets. The designation was engraved onto our collars. Penal Legion 43 Theta, Convict Infantry. The numbers were meant to replace identity, to make obedience easier, but numbers remember too. Each one of us carried the ghosts of those who'd worn it before. Some said the collars recorded our sins, others said they counted prayers. As the barge engines roared to life, one of the men beside me started laughing. "They're saving parchment," he said. "Execution by logistics." The guards didn't stop him. They didn't need to. The collar did a flash of light, a smell like burning copper, and then quiet again. No one spoke after that. We learned the rule that keeps you alive longer than faith: never draw attention. We spent 3 standard weeks aboard the barge before we saw light again. There were no days or nights, just the artificial glow of lumen strips and the rhythm of feeding cycles. The air was thick with sweat, oil, and incense meant to mask decay. We slept in narrow racks stacked 5 high, each one with a restraint clasp that locked over the chest while we dreamed. They said it was to prevent injury during warp turbulence. We knew it was to stop us from running. Each cycle began with a prayer we were forced to repeat until the vox clicked silent. Through suffering, we serve. Through death, we are redeemed. The guards shouted it, the collars echoed it, and soon, even the walls seemed to whisper it. By the 5th repetition, the words lost meaning. By the 50th, they became muscle memory, faith programmed through exhaustion. Occasionally, the commissar would walk the aisles between bunks, his boots leaving wet prints on the deck. He never looked at us, only the collars, ensuring the lights still blinked. Once, a man in the row ahead of me began to sob during inspection. No one knows if it was fear or faith that broke him. The commissar pressed his palm against the activator rune on his datapad. A hiss of ozone, a pop of red, and the man's body sagged forward, headless. The smell lingered for hours. After that, silence became the ship's only law. I remember one night, if you can call anything, aboard a barge night, when the lights dimmed for system maintenance. The darkness was complete. Somewhere in the rows above, a voice started to hum. Low, almost tender. It was an old hymn, something I half remembered from before the sentence. Within moments, others joined in. 100 broken throats humming together in defiance of everything we had been told to forget. When the lights came back, the guards stormed in with shock mauls. The humming didn't stop, even as men fell twitching to the floor. It was the only rebellion we ever managed, and it ended in perfect silence. The warp voyage warped more than time. Some of us began to dream in unison. I'd wake to men murmuring the same words I'd heard in sleep, fragments of battlefield prayers, promises to wives, confessions to ghosts. The collars pulsed softly in rhythm, sinking to the dreams like they were listening. Maybe they were. Maybe that's how the Imperium measures devotion, through the dreams of the condemned. On the 22nd day, the alarm sounded, not the red glare of danger, but the pale gold of arrival. The floor trembled as the ship began atmospheric descent. Through the slits in the hull plating, we saw glimpses of the world below, a wasteland of craters and smoke. The soil turned to glass from constant bombardment. The guards unlocked our restraints. A servo skull drifted overhead, reading out deployment rites in a voice like broken music. You die for him who does not die. You burn for him who does not forgive. Rise, Legion. Rise and be worthy of erasure. The hatch opened, and light poured in. I remember squinting against it, thinking it was beautiful, the way only things that kill you can be. The first breath of open air stung like sin leaving the lungs. They handed us lasguns without charge packs and told us to advance toward the smoke. That was our induction, that was our redemption. When we reached the surface, the heat hit first. Even through the filtered rebreather, the air tasted of iron and burned oil. The sky was colorless, neither night nor day, just a haze of smoke reflecting endless bombardment. We disembarked in silence, one file after another, boots sinking into mud, slicked with promethium runoff. Around us stretched what they called the front, though it looked more like a graveyard that hadn't yet realized it was finished. The first order was simple: march east until the Vox said stop. We didn't ask where east led. Questions were for officers, and we were less than that. Every kilometer, the ground was marked by broken armor, severed limbs, and fragments of Imperial banners too tattered to recognize. A storm of ash rolled across the plains, carrying voices that might have been the wind or the ones who died here before us. The Penal legions weren't meant to hold lines. We were meant to be seen dying, so others might believe victory was possible. I remember the first time we were told to dig. The commissar watched from his chimera while we clawed at the dirt with our hands. Shovels were a privilege. By the time the trenches were deep enough to hide in, the bombardment had already started. The air pressure knocked men down before the shells did. When the attack came, we barely noticed. The enemy wasn't close enough to see, only flashes of light and the whistle of artillery. Our collars beeped once a command pulse, then the Vox barked the word advance. Dozens of men hesitated. A few ran. The collars glowed red, and those lights bloomed across the field like dying stars. The rest of us moved forward, driven less by courage than by the fear of standing still. I don't know how long the fighting lasted. When the barrage ended, the horizon was on fire. I couldn't tell who we were fighting anymore. I don't think it mattered. The commissar reported victory. We reported nothing. We had no tongues left for triumph. After the battle, I saw them, the officers of the loyal regiment, standing on the ridge, clean and unmarked. They looked down at us as we dragged our wounded back to camp. I could tell by their faces that they didn't see soldiers. They saw utility, the Penal. Legions were a kind of machine, cheap, replaceable, and self-destructive. At night, the med servitors moved through the rows, extracting charge packs from the dead and reassigning collars to the living. The sound of the locks snapping shut was louder than any prayer. I asked one of the servitors once if the Emperor forgave those who'd already died. Its Vox grill crackled, and then it answered in a voice that didn't sound entirely human. Forgiveness is for the living. You are still waiting. I don't remember sleeping after that. The sky was always glowing from the fires. We took turns staring at it, each of us wondering if this was the Emperor's light or simply another sun burning out. I began to envy the quiet ones, the men whose collars had stopped blinking. They had already been judged. By dawn, the orders came again. Another march, another assault, another field. We moved like a tide that never reached shore. Every step forward buried another name, another number. The Imperium's most disposable warriors, and we still prayed to be noticed. We were not stationed anywhere. We drifted from ruin to ruin like a contagion the Imperium refused to cure. Each battlefield was already lost when we arrived, but the orders never changed. Advance, cleanse, die. The officers called it reclamation duty. We called it feeding the fire. The world itself had stopped trying to live. I remember walking through a city so broken that even its shadows had fled. Towers lay gutted, their upper halves missing like teeth torn from a jaw. The air shimmered with heat, the kind that cooked blood inside armor. Our boots left black prints that smoked when lifted. No birds, no wind, just the sound of marching collars clicking in time with the heartbeat of the dying world. The first time we met resistance, it wasn't the enemy, they were gone. What we faced were the remnants of the Imperium's own defense forces, men who had gone too long without orders and too deep into fear. They fired on us as if shooting at ghosts. The commissar ordered us to return fire, so we did. When it was over, the trenches were filled with men wearing the same aquila we did. The Vox called it friendly correction. Sometimes, when the bombardments paused, I could hear faint hymns drifting through the smoke. Loyalist preachers chanting for salvation, their voices thin as incense. The penal legions weren't allowed chaplains. The commissars filled that role. Their sermons were shorter. Faith without obedience is heresy, they'd say. Faith with hesitation is treason. We learned to pray by action, one step forward, one trigger pulled. The worst were the quiet nights between deployments. The silence felt heavier than the shelling. The collars never turned off. They pulsed faintly, red against our throats, sinking to our hearts. You could tell who was close to breaking because the pulse quickened. Some of us started calling it the Emperor's metronome. It was easier than calling it what it was, a reminder that our deaths were scheduled. One night, we bivouacked in the ruins of a manufactorum. The machines were still, covered in dust, their cogitators blinking sporadically like they remembered what work felt like. I found a data slate wedged in a console, half burned but functional. It held a single entry: production suspended, all resources diverted to penal units. Efficiency must be maintained. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. Even the machines knew we were inventory. Later that same night, one of the men removed his collar. We watched him, frozen, as he pried it off with a piece of rebar. The skin beneath was blistered and raw, his veins pulsing black with infection. For a moment, he looked free, relieved, almost human. Then his body jerked, light spilling from his eyes. The collar detonated, leaving nothing above his shoulders but steam. The commissar said nothing. The tech priest simply walked over, retrieved the smoking ring, and cleaned it for reuse. We marched the next day under a sky the color of gunmetal, every step sinking into the ashes of the last army to pass this way. I don't think we believed in redemption anymore. But disbelief doesn't save you here. The Emperor doesn't need believers, he needs replacements. We learned that lesson with every sunrise. And every night, fewer of us lived to repeat it. We learned to stop counting days. The war didn't move forward or backward, it just shifted shape around us. Orders came through the Vox like distant thunder, garbled, repeated, uncaring. Sometimes the signals contradicted each other. We'd march east for a day, then west for 2. Men joked that the Emperor was playing dice with our lives. The commissars didn't laugh. The fields around us were a grave made of mud and wire. We fought for high ground that was nothing more than a hill of corpses buried under ash. Every advance meant losing half a regiment. Every retreat meant losing the rest. The Legion always replenished itself. Fresh convicts shipped in weekly, faces pale with the fear we had long since worn away. They were branded, collared, and thrown into our ranks like logs into a furnace. Some prayed, others screamed, and all of them died the same. It's strange what you start to envy when you live this way. I envied the dead their silence. I envied the officers their ignorance. Most of all, I envied the machines. The servitors didn't hesitate or tremble or dream. They just obeyed. And yet, when the night was long enough and the wind low, I swore I could hear them humming. Not words, but a rhythm, like they pitied us. There was a battle near the river line, a ruin of steel bridges half sunken in sludge. We were ordered to hold the crossing against an enemy that never appeared. Instead, we fought the planet itself. The water was poison, thick with oil, burning wherever our boots touched. We stood waist deep in it for 2 days, repelling shadows. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found us still firing into the dark, half blind, half mad. They didn't relieve us. They took our positions and ordered us onward. On the third night, one of the new arrivals collapsed beside me, a kid, maybe 15. His collar blinked yellow, malfunctioning. He kept clutching his throat, gasping as if the air itself were choking him. The tech priests wouldn't approach. They said the device was blessed, and interference would be sacrilege. I held him until the light went red. There wasn't even an explosion, just a pulse of heat and the smell of iron. The priests logged it as a technical correction. We burned the bodies when we had fuel and buried them when we didn't. Once, a commissar ordered us to stack them as a barricade. He called it resourceful. I called it worship. Every time I climbed over that wall of the dead, I could feel their eyes on my back, like they were watching to see if I'd fall. I started, talking to them when no one else would listen. I'd whisper numbers, names forgotten, ranks erased. I'd recite them like prayers, in order, in rhythm with the hum of the collars. It was the only sound that kept me from thinking. The others thought I'd gone mad. Maybe I had. Madness feels like memory when you've been reduced to a number. The war never changed. It just kept digesting us, piece by piece, feeding on our faith until even belief tasted like metal. We were told, the Emperor protects. I began to wonder if that was true or if he simply observes. Either way, he never looked down at the penal legions. We were beneath his sight. That was our punishment. That was our purpose. There are moments when the war forgets to kill you. They're worse than the ones that do. In those hours between bombardments, you start to hear things, your heartbeat echoing in the helmet, the wet click of your collar, the wind scraping across bones that used to be men. The silence presses down, harder than artillery. It feels like waiting for judgment, only no one's left to pass it. The trenches stretched for kilometers, full of bodies that refused to sink. The rain never stopped, and neither did the smell. Some of the men talked about seeing light in the distance, figures walking the lines at night, tall and gold, carrying torches that never dimmed. They said the Emperor walked among us. The commissars called it heresy, but in the penal legions, even heresy feels like hope. One night, I woke to find a man kneeling beside me, whispering into the mud. His collar wasn't blinking. I thought he was dead until I heard him breathe the words, "He's listening." Before I could ask who, the glow returned to his neck. He screamed once and fell still, smoke rising from his mouth. I didn't sleep again for 3 nights. There's something about dying in shifts that makes you forget what living feels like. Each dawn, we lined up for rations that never came, for orders that repeated like broken prayers. Each dusk, the sky burned and we followed. The line between faith and obedience blurred until they were the same. I once asked a priest back before all this what faith truly was. He told me it was belief without evidence. Now I think it's obedience without memory. Our legion commander, if you could call him that, was a man named Varin Holt. His voice came through the vox, distorted, never face to face. He reminded us daily that redemption was a calculation. Every step forward is a sin erased, he said. I used to count my steps until the numbers stopped meaning anything. We reached the ruins of a cathedral on the 8th March. Its spires were broken, its stained glass shattered, but the altar still stood, covered in ash and names carved into the stone. Someone had written in blood, "We died for his silence." The commissar ordered us to destroy the inscription. I traced it once with my glove before we moved on. The words didn't feel like blasphemy. They felt like honesty. The bombardments grew heavier after that. It was as if the planet itself was trying to bury us. Our trench collapsed during the third barrage, burying half the regiment alive. I dug until my hands bled, until I uncovered a face I recognized: 3,290, the man whose charm I carried. His eyes were open, but there was peace in them. The medallion around my neck grew warm, pulsing faintly with every explosion. For the first time, I wondered if it was keeping me alive or waiting for me to join him. When the sky cleared, only a few of us remained. The commissar didn't issue new orders. He just stared into the horizon, muttering scripture to a god that never answered. We stayed there, surrounded by the dead, waiting for another command that never came. The Vox hissed softly, a breath caught between transmissions. I thought I heard my own number whispered back to me. That was when I realized it. We weren't fighting a war anymore. We were what the Imperium leaves behind when it runs out of faith. Silence has a weight. You don't notice it until it presses down hard enough to hurt. When the shelling stopped, when even the static in the Vox went quiet, I realized how loud absence could be. The air felt wrong, too still, too expectant. That was the day I learned the war wasn't over. It had simply run out of people to keep it moving. We dug in along what the maps called a defensive line, though it was little more than a trench carved through broken stone and memory. The commissar was gone, no orders, no sermons, just the hiss of wind cutting across the corpses. There were maybe 30 of us left, though it was hard to tell who still breathed. The collars still blinked, little red stars marking where faith used to live. For 2 days, we waited. No reinforcements, no supply drops, not even the sound of engines. We sent out patrols, small groups, 2 or 3 men at a time, but they never came back. By the third night, no one volunteered. Hunger gnawed, softer than fear, but longer. We chewed on strips of boot leather soaked in rainwater and tried not to think about how quiet the world had become. I found a Vox set buried under rubble, its casing cracked but still alive. I carried it back to the trench, hoping for a signal. Static, then a faint whisper of a channel half open. I tuned it carefully, pulse matching the rhythm of the interference. For a moment, I thought I heard a voice, one word, stretched and warped by distance: remember. I don't know whose voice it was. Maybe command, maybe the Emperor, maybe just the wind learning to sound merciful. The others stopped speaking entirely after that. Communication turned into gestures, nods, or the blink of a collar light. Words felt wasteful, like breath might anger whatever gods were left watching. The Legion had finally become what the Imperium wanted: silent, obedient, erased. I started keeping count again, not of days or kills, but of heartbeats. The collar's pulse and mine had fallen into sync. It was the only proof I had that something still moved inside me. At night, I'd rest my fingers against the metal and feel it hum, a steady, calm reminder that the Imperium still owned what remained of me. One of the men, a trooper named Silen, began carving words into the trench wall with a broken bayonet. At first, I thought they were numbers, but when I looked closer, they were names. Not his own, not ours, names from regiments long gone, drawn from somewhere he shouldn't have remembered. When I asked where he'd heard them, he smiled and said, "The collars tell me when they sleep." That night, his stopped blinking. By dawn, I stopped trying to wake him. The collar was cold, the metal dark. I left it where it was and covered him with dirt. It didn't feel like burial, it felt like sealing a promise I didn't understand. The Vox still murmurs now, just faintly. Every few hours, it repeats the same sound, a pattern, a word stretched too far to recognize. I listen to it between breaths, hoping it will change, hoping it will stop. It never does. Sometimes I wonder if this silence is peace, or just the pause before we are remembered again. By the fourth day, the silence had started to sound like prayer. It hummed through the air, soft but constant, the kind of stillness that makes you question whether the world is holding its breath, or if it's already exhaled for good. I remember standing at the edge of the trench, staring into the fog, waiting for movement that never came. Even the flies had stopped buzzing. The dead had finally claimed the patience we never learned. There was no chain of command left. We took shifts guarding nothing, cleaning weapons that hadn't fired in days, pretending it mattered. It was strange how duty clung to us even after purpose was gone. I suppose obedience is the last instinct that dies in a soldier. That night, a storm rolled in from the west, dark, clouds glowing faintly with distant fire. Rain began as a whisper and grew until the trench turned to mire again. The water rose past my boots, cold and heavy. I remember looking down and seeing the reflection of my own face, blurred by ripples, framed by the faint red blink of my collar. For the first time, I thought it looked peaceful. Somewhere beyond the ridge, I heard explosions, slow, methodical, distant. The kind that don't aim for victory, only conclusion. It could have been an orbital strike, or just the planet deciding to collapse under its own grief. The thought didn't scare me. Nothing did anymore. When dawn came, it wasn't light that woke me, it was the vox. The static had changed. The noise had rhythm now, a slow pulse that matched the beating in my chest. I sat up, hand on the dial, and whispered into the receiver. "This is 3119, I said. "Penal Legion 43 Theta, requesting orders." The response came like a breath across distance. "Confirmed." Then silence. I waited a long time before I realized that was the order. Confirmed, existence acknowledged. That was all the Imperium required of the condemned to exist long enough to be forgotten properly. I left the trench that morning. The others stayed, faces blank, collars still blinking faintly through the rain. Maybe they were praying, maybe they were empty. I didn't ask. The horizon stretched out in grey layers, trenches fading into mist, cities sinking under smoke. I walked until the ground leveled and the wind changed, carrying the faint scent of burning promethium. There were ruins there, an old command bunker, half buried. Inside, I found relics of order, maps, data slates, an empty ration crate marked with the Aquila. Someone had scrawled words across the wall in soot, "He sees us not." I sat beneath those words and listened to the storm. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, measured, heavy. I turned, expecting another soldier, another number. But there was no one, just echoes, walking in perfect time with my breath. The collars outside blinked faintly through the fog, scattered like dying embers across the wasteland. It was almost beautiful, a constellation of obedience fading into stillness. I pressed the activator rune on my collar, half wondering if it would answer. The light turned amber, then red, then steady again. No detonation, no release. Only that faint hum, syncing with the pulse of the vox, whispering the same rhythm, confirmed. That was the closest I've come to faith in years being noticed by the machine, if only for a heartbeat. The rain ended on the 7th day. The sky was pale and dry, colorless as bone. The wind carried no ash, now only dust, fine and endless, like the remains of a prayer spoken too long. I sat beside the vox and waited for it to die. It never did. The static kept breathing. I think it was the only thing on this world still willing to. I don't know when I stopped, trying to move. The wound in my side had turned cold, the pain dulled to something almost comforting. The others were gone, buried by storms or by the quiet that followed. I had become the last voice of the Legion, though even I wasn't sure if I still believed in it. Sometimes I spoke into the vox, just to hear the sound. I would say my number, my crimes, the names of the fallen. I thought that maybe, somewhere, a record keeper would log it, and for one brief instant, the Imperium would remember us. That's all any man wants, to be known for a moment longer than his heartbeat. The last thing I received through the vox wasn't a voice. It was a sound, low, harmonic, almost kind. It reminded me of a chant we used to recite before a charge. Through suffering we serve, through death we are redeemed. But this was slower, softer, like a lullaby meant for the forgotten. It filled the air until the wind itself began to hum in time with it. I think I slept then. Maybe for hours, maybe for years. When I woke, the sun was setting behind the ruins, and the world looked almost peaceful. The trenches had filled with sand, the collars of the dead no longer blinked. It struck me then that the silence we had feared had finally arrived, and it wasn't cruel. It was patient. I removed my helmet and set it beside the Vox. The air stung, sharp and clean, stripped of war's taste. I could see my reflection faintly in the cracked lens, a hollow man with red light still burning at his throat. I thought of 3,290, of Cylon, of the hundreds whose numbers had pulsed beside mine. Maybe the hum I heard wasn't the Vox at all. Maybe it was them, each one a fragment of memory, a piece of the Emperor's blind machinery still turning somewhere far above. I spoke my name then, the one I hadn't said in years. It felt strange, heavy on the tongue, like invoking a ghost. The sound didn't echo, it didn't need to. The world had already heard enough. When the footsteps came, I didn't flinch. They were soft, measured, deliberate. A figure moved through the fog, a soldier, collar blinking faintly. He stopped beside me, his armor scorched, his face unreadable. Without a word, he knelt, unfastened my collar, and placed it around his own neck. The light steadied, brightened, and began to pulse again. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The act said everything. I reached for the Vox, but the hum had gone quiet. There was only the wind, and the steady rhythm of that new heartbeat walking away. For the first time, I understood what the silence truly meant. It wasn't abandonment, it was continuity. The Imperium doesn't forget, it replaces. I closed my eyes and let the last of the sound fade. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment, the world was silent. The next, it was full of footsteps. They came like rain, soft, endless, purposeful. When I opened my eyes, the horizon was alive with movement. Silhouettes marched through the fog, collars, pulsing red like 1,000 beating hearts. The Penal Legion had returned, or perhaps it had never left. They moved with the same rhythm I remembered, the slow, synchronized march of the condemned. No banners, no hymns, no officers, just obedience made flesh. As they passed, I saw familiar faces, though they couldn't have been real. Men who had died beside me on other fields, other worlds. Each wore a collar, blinking in time with mine. Each step they took felt like it echoed inside my chest. I tried to stand, but my body refused. The wound had gone numb, my hands pale beneath the grime. Still, I wanted to see them clearly, to see if any of them looked back. None did. They didn't notice me at all. That's when I understood. I was already part of them. The silence that had followed me wasn't abandonment, it was induction. I had become the thing I feared most, a whisper in the endless procession of forgotten men. A shape broke from the line, a single soldier, younger than most. His collar blinked a steady amber. He knelt beside me, his shadow falling across my face. The armor he wore was scorched, patched with scraps of others' names. When he spoke, it wasn't with pity or command. His voice was calm, steady, mechanical. Designation confirmed, he said. Transfer acknowledged. He reached for my collar. My first instinct was to resist, but my hands wouldn't move. The lock disengaged with a quiet hiss, and for a moment, I felt lighter, like the air itself had grown kind. Then he placed it around his own neck. The light steadied, burned bright, and fell into rhythm with his pulse. He didn't look at me. None of them ever did. They just kept walking, the line stretching beyond sight, toward a horizon that never stopped burning. I tried to call out, to tell him my name, but the word died before it reached air. Maybe it was better that way. The name didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the number. The Vox beside me crackled once, faintly. Through the static came a voice, not words, just sound. A tone of recognition, like a machine acknowledging completion. It wasn't cruel. It was final. I lay back and watched the march continue. Their collars glowed brighter as the light faded from the sky, until it seemed the world itself was pulsing with that same red rhythm. I wondered if anyone on Terra would ever know this place existed, or if the Administratum would simply mark it as expended resources. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of chanting, thousands of voices repeating the same line I'd spoken 100 times before. Through suffering, we serve. Through death, we are redeemed. Only now, I could hear the truth in it. The Imperium doesn't redeem, it recycles. I closed my eyes as the noise faded, replaced by the soft hum of the vox. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard my own heartbeat slow, merging with the rhythm of the collars. For the first time since my sentencing, I wasn't afraid. The march stretched across the valley until the horizon itself began to move. The collars glowed faintly beneath the haze, each light a heartbeat pulsing through the fog. I could feel it even from where I lay, the rhythm of the condemned, steady as a machine's prayer. It was strange to think that I had ever feared this silence. Now it sounded like order, the only kind of truth left in a universe made of noise. The soldier who had taken my collar didn't look back. None of them did. They moved as one body, a single thought carried through 1,000 throats. I watched until the fog consumed them, until the pulse of red faded into the pale grey distance. When the last light vanished, I thought it was over, that the Legion had passed and I was finally free to die. But then the wind shifted, and I heard the sound again, the whisper of new footsteps. From the ruins behind me, another column emerged, fresh convicts, unscarred, their collars newly fastened, blinking in perfect rhythm. Guards walked among them, their armor unblemished, their eyes indifferent. A commissar's voice carried over the wind, reciting a prayer of purpose. Through obedience, we endure. Through endurance, we serve. Through service, we are absolved. The words were the same as when I'd first heard them, but this time, they no longer hurt. They simply were. Truth recited by men who didn't understand it. I wondered if any of the new arrivals would live long enough to. One of them stumbled as they passed, a young soldier with dirt still fresh on his uniform. The guard beside him raised a shock maul, but the boy steadied himself before the blow could land. I saw his face wide-eyed, terrified, still clinging to the idea that the Emperor might be watching. I wanted to tell him the truth, that faith is just another weapon the Imperium keeps sharp by feeding it blood. But my voice was gone. The air that left me came out as dust. The marchers disappeared into the fog again, their rhythm fading into distance, replaced by the crackle of the vox. The static pulsed once, then spoke in a voice I didn't recognize, calm, deliberate, familiar. Legion 43 Theta confirmed. Deployment complete, awaiting next allocation. Next allocation. That's what they called it, the replacement of the forgotten. Somewhere, an administratum clerk was already adjusting the numbers, ensuring the Legion's strength remained consistent. No mention of the dead, no note of the lost. Just a column of figures balanced against the cost of faith. I thought of my number 3119 and realized it no longer belonged to me. It was already being worn by someone else. Perhaps that young soldier. Perhaps the man who'd taken my collar. Either way, it would continue, just as it always had. The Imperium didn't need names, it needed continuity. A faint warmth spread through my chest then, dull but certain. I thought it was pain, but it wasn't. It was acceptance. The machine of the Imperium would never stop turning, and I had been a cog within it, small, temporary, necessary. That was all any of us were meant to be. As the last light faded from the valley, I lay back and listened to the echo of the march, each step merging into the rhythm of my slowing heart. The vox crackled once more, its static blending with the wind, and for a moment, I could almost believe it was prayer. The air was cold again, not sharp or cruel, just still, the kind of cold that erases sound. I could feel my heartbeat slowing, sinking one last time with the faint hum of the vox beside me. Every pulse seemed to echo farther away, like it was learning to belong to something larger. The horizon glowed faintly now, a thin line of light beneath the clouds. The march had vanished beyond it, swallowed by distance, but the rhythm remained. You could almost mistake it for thunder if you didn't know what it was. I did. It was the Imperium breathing. It never stops, it just forgets what lungs it's using. I wondered if they'd find me. Maybe the next Legion, maybe the carrion servitors that followed armies like shadows. They'd log me, strip my gear, retrieve the collar. Asset retrieved. A phrase so clean it almost sounds holy. That's how the Imperium keeps faith, by keeping records. My hands trembled as I reached for the vox one last time. The casing was cracked, the rune flickering like a candle in the wind. I pressed the transmit key and spoke softly, unsure if the words were still reaching anything beyond the static. "This is 3119, Penal Legion 43 Theta, confirming final transmission." For a heartbeat, there was only the hiss of dead channels. Then, faintly, a reply, just one word, stretched thin by distance. "Confirmed." It was the same voice as before, the same calm, indifferent tone that had sentenced me, commanded me, and forgotten me. And somehow, that was enough. Being acknowledged, even as a ghost, felt like closure. I leaned back against the trench wall and let my gaze follow the sky. It wasn't beautiful, but it was vast. The same sky that hung over Terra, over 1 billion worlds, over every man and woman who still believed their suffering meant something. Maybe that was the Emperor's mercy, not salvation, but perspective. The wind rose, carrying dust and whispers across the ground. Somewhere behind me, the collars of the dead began to blink again slowly, faintly, one after another. I thought for a moment I was hallucinating, but then I realized what it was. Each light was syncing to the same rhythm. Not random, not chaos. Order. They were remembering. I smiled then. It wasn't joy, it was recognition. All this time, I thought the Imperium had forgotten us. But maybe that was the point. Maybe forgetting was how it remembered, by ensuring the machine never stopped, by replacing, recycling, continuing. I was never meant to be eternal, only functional, only loyal. The light from the horizon brightened, once more, and I imagined it was dawn. The hum of the collars blended with the vox, forming a single, steady tone. My eyes grew heavy, my pulse slowed to meet it. For a moment, I thought I heard my number spoken again quietly, almost kindly. Then everything went still. I don't know if it was death or duty, or if there's a difference anymore. All I know is that somewhere out there, another man has taken my place. Another number has begun to blink. Another voice will whisper into the vox and call it prayer. And the Imperium will listen, not with mercy, but with memory. The Imperium forgot me, as it was meant to. Another will take my number, and the war will go on.